It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Won't you be mine? Won't you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Won't you be mine? Won't you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor, whoopsie, just like you. Always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. When we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Oh, would you be mine? Please, won't you be my neighbor? Mr. Rogers is a show that ran 4 decades, and I love the ever-squeezing sweaters out of it. Mr. Rogers actually did a lot with his show. A lot that I love, like, to pieces. Oh look, here are all of these pieces. There's a couple messages that Mr. Rogers wanted to get out to children and wanted them to hear. Messages like patience, to share with people that standard children's show fare. But he also wanted to show that it's alright to make mistakes, as he did often in his show. There's a fantastic amount of memes and photos from the show that's made it on the internet that people out of context think is very funny, but in context of the show is wonderful. Perhaps a little more unusual for a children's show fare, Mr. Rogers wanted to show that it's okay to make mistakes. And he did this by making mistakes on air and just keeping going and keeping them in, because editing out mistakes was really inauthentic to him. Famously, there's a picture online that people share around where Mr. Rogers is drawing a house, and it looks bad. But that's the kind of thing that Mr. Rogers did. Mr. Rogers wanted to show that not everyone has to do everything perfectly. And he didn't. And couldn't. And it was wonderful for that. Mr. Rogers wanted to show that everyone was special. And despite those mistakes, everyone could work on their talents, follow their interests in order to improve at them and find something that they like and enjoy to do. He often would have children on his show that were extraordinary, that had talents, that could do a thing, have a special skill, and Mr. Rogers would enjoy it and try it. Another clip that went around on the internet was Mr. Rogers trying to breakdance after a child breakdances for him. And he's looking at this child and he's very impressed and he's very happy. And he's not very judgmental, especially in a time where countercultures, new dances, things that children do and like to do are looked down upon, even today. Mr. Rogers took a distinct interest in it and even tried it. A lot has been said about Mr. Rogers, especially by Mr. Rogers himself, as he's very candid with what he wanted the show to be in interviews and with friends. You can see it for yourself, not just on PBS.com, but also there was a documentary on Mr. Rogers called You Are the One I Like, which is one of his main messages. You are special, you are the one I like. That came out in, I think, 2018, and in 2019 there was a movie with one of those other really nice guys from Hollywood playing Mr. Rogers. But Mr. Rogers was subversive in how wholesome he was. Generally believing, taking an interest in things that people said without judgment is very subversive. The hierarchy, the way of life that we have, the old standard of things is very repellent to the new. New things are often mocked and looked down on for being silly and dumb, but also because they're fun. They're fun things and the world is very serious. And Mr. Rogers didn't take any of that. Mr. Rogers wasn't judgmental when someone brought something new to him. If somebody liked the way they were and functioned the way they were, Mr. Rogers celebrated them. That's why Mr. Rogers also took many disabled children to showcase their disability and how they're still people and how they're still worthy of respect and love and being listened to. Mr. Rogers tried to teach, for example, that police are also your neighbors. In a time of unrest and civil rights, he had a black police officer in his neighborhood. And famously, they would sit and rinse off each other's feet in front of his house in a little wading pool. There's a lot of weird things in Mr. Rogers. But notably, he knew the name of this police officer. The police officer, other than being black, was also from his neighborhood. Mr. Rogers knew him by name, and the police officer didn't carry around a gun or a weapon that would be deadly. Which, both of those changes are not things that several people in our current climate would like. A disarmed police officer and a police officer from your neighborhood. They might accept the one over the other, but those would both be rapidly different modes of our operation. What was insufferable to me as a child is the land of make-believe, where there would be a bunch of puppets where Mr. Rogers would use his imagination and he would use his own voice for the puppets. And when you're not in the land of make-believe section, he would bring out the puppets and say, "This is Lady Elaine. I do her voice like this. I'm Lady Elaine." And that was amazing, especially for children's shows where they try to hide everything that happens so the children thinks it's a magic and they pay attention. Mr. Rogers was slow and a little boring and very candid with what he did. And in the land of make-believe, the puppets had a weird rationality to each other. There's a king, but he can't order people to do things. He has to ask them nicely. When they say no, he asks why and tries to work with them to get things to happen. Prince Friday is a cut-up. Oh man, I don't remember what it said, but there was a king order, and Prince Friday was like, it was another dumb thing my dad wants to do. He might be my favorite. He wasn't full out like that, but it was pretty close. I love it. Lady Elaine was a beauty queen on the show, but if you look at the puppet, it was an ugly little puppet. But in the show, she's a beauty queen, and Mr. Rogers wanted to show that, there are different standards of beauty, or that was just how we made puppets. I don't know. It's a great weird thing. But Mr. Rogers Keeley put out this message that you, yes you are special and you are the one I like. But notably, this message that you are special, yes you, specifically watching this, got a lot of backlash from a lot of people, namely conservative people. But Mr. Rogers did not respond directly to this kind of criticism. He didn't talk directly or try to argue with on the news these weird glass-chewing psychopaths that didn't like the message. And unfortunately, I was blind to this propaganda that I then adjusted my worldview to, and then repeated. Being a conservative in the early thousands and late 90s was weird, particular for me, because I didn't reject any of these lessons. I just held them all in my head, and they would just come out, depending on situation, of what needed to be applied for what I had learned. You are special was as valid as a fact as people are dumb. Children are dumb. Children can't be trusted. It's okay to lie to children. And the big one, if everyone is special, then no one is. Through my changing political views, I've learned things about myself that I once equated to one ideology or another and how right I was. I used to think that I was so abrasive because I was correct. And then transforming, being moderate, and now being very left, I was abrasive every step of the way. It had nothing to do with how valid the facts are that I had. It probably still doesn't have anything to do with that. But I think I am valid and consistent now. I wasn't deeply in the theory of conservative thought. I didn't read Ayn Rand for that scholarship, though now that I think of it, that sounds like a trap, and I should look into that later, or see if someone else has. But despite that, I still stepped in line with the propaganda that was presented to me through radio personalities like Rush Limbaugh and Mark Belling, and then the conservative thoughts that permeate our culture and make it into our everyday language. One of many conflicting views I held in my head is that we are to help the poor. Christ said, "Blessed are the poor. The meek should inherit the earth." We should help the poor is not a statement that Christians will disagree with. Any Christian. And most people will agree that we should like the whore. that we should help the poor. Christ said, if you help the lowliest of people, you've helped me. More than that, Christ and his disciples propped up being poor as being slightly more righteous. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. But then there's an opposing idea from capitalism, from the invisible hand of the market, implied to be God, that people get what they deserve. People need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. No offense, but just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean it's good. And it also doesn't mean that I fully agree with it. I do think billionaires are bad people by default. With this implication, the Bible also can be used as a tool of oppression, saying that it's better to be poor, it's easier to serve your masters. If you serve your masters, it's like serving Christ. Messages in the Bible have been used to back up the state murdering people and also imprisoning people and also slavery. Not only can the Bible be interpreted as a tool of oppression, but it's also been used to distinctly oppress people. Even if you're Catholic or non-Catholic, you think that some form of Christianity has done something bad. Whether it's killing Muslims, keeping people poor, not teaching people to read. It's been used to justify the Holocaust. If you objectively look back in history, the Bible was used to usurp religions that gave individuals power. For example, many older religions would focus on the earth, have battling pantheons. You could choose a god that would serve your interests. Like if you really like fishing, you can choose Poseidon and be really chill with Poseidon, or boating, or hunting. They were meant to empower you to pursue your interest. Beyond that, other religions that take from nature themselves say that nature is what gives you power and you have a connection to nature so that you then can take your power and exercise it on the world and gave you authority. The key was increasing agency on the person. Oh, you're poor or not successful or having trouble. Eat this herb, hold this talisman, pray to this person, and you can excel in this thing you've chosen. Where in Christianity you can pray for something, but there's a lot of things that flat out God will not want and does not want you to succeed in, because God has his own will that you are to submit to. Christianity has and does make people accept their lot in life, not question injustice, and to be passively martyred. Then it turns out that a religion of passive martyrdom, passive obedience, found itself seeking revenge for the rich and powerful. You are poor, and that's good, actually. Never quite makes its way to the emperors and the rich people and the well-off middle class that follow this religion. But of course there is a good interpretation. And Fred Rogers was religious. He was a Presbyterian minister? He was a minister. He went through seminary. He served a people before he started his show, where he talked to children about love and how special they were. There is a good, or I would say great, interpretation of the Bible, where people get along, they're not supposed to hurt or kill each other, they're supposed to see the best in one another and help each other grow, they're supposed to help even the lowliest of people, and they see each other as brothers and sisters, or more commonly or colloquially known as neighbors. Everyone is special and has needs, but also talents, and can be appreciated for all of those things. But the backlash to this line of thinking is insidious. One story I remember during my childhood is a woman needed help. She'd lost her husband, and she needed help affording things to feed her family. I think it was 2 children, and she was a close friend of my mother. So the church voted, and they decided to give her some money, a little bit each month, to help her out with things. A few days before removing this financial support, the church found out that she regularly had her nails done. Somebody spotted her at the salon. They decided that they didn't need to help this woman, or she didn't need help, because once in a while she had her nails done. And I don't know the details. It could have been every day. It probably wasn't. And also, I don't care. This is the same logic that conservatives use to say that people with iPhones don't need help from the government. You know, like healthcare. Just because you have a phone that you can pay $20 a month to have, and it is actually necessary for communication, getting on the internet, writing papers, it's fully an integrated part of our everyday lives that's infinitely useful. If you have that, you should just get rid of that and have healthcare, which is something that costs much more money than a cell phone. But I think Mr. Rogers was smarter than me because he didn't actually contend with the backlash, with these bad faith arguments and contradictions to his worldview that seem to use the same kind of framing in the Bible for justification. Mr. Rogers just kept putting out his message to the children that would listen and learn and loved his show. Even as late as like 2013, there's still Wall Street Journal ads calling him evil for saying that children are special. Mr. Rogers probably thought, well, these guys' audience has one foot in the grave already. I might as well talk to the thousands of children that watch my show. He kept busy making his show, making books, doing interviews, getting funding for public broadcasting, and sticking to his message that you are the one he likes. You are special. Even when I was just repeating these phrases, if everyone is special, no one is, I still had to admit that people were special, that everyone is unique and different. I had to cave in multiple times. Oh, of course that thing is true, but this thing I am saying is a very good phrase. Everyone has different skills. Everyone is unique in this way, but also bad. Two ideas that I held in my head. Everyone is bad. Everyone is special. Two ideas. I held them in my head. They orbited me. They orbited inside my head like two moons that I would hope would never touch. Even if I didn't consciously think about how they were contradicting facts, I held on to both of them because one made me comfortable, but one was true. My moons, Luna, the truth, and melancholia. These thoughts were chains. Sure, one of them was made out of paper, but if a chain keeps you in one spot, it doesn't matter what it's made out of. And if you like the spot where you are, well, it's your spot. You can make your arguments out of whatever you want. You're gonna stay where you're comfortable. These chains kept me in one spot. Raymond, a preacher boy, a friend of the poor. As long as they did what I liked and came to my church, the chains stretched as much as they needed to keep me in one spot. I held the thoughts away from one another, no matter where it wanted to go. There were facts to match my feelings wherever they went. Everyone knows these things. There are various levels of honest. They'll give up ground if they had to. They'll agree with it if they have to. But they won't change their mind. They won't let the chains touch. They won't let the moons collide. Because if the moons collide, one might be obliterated. And they're comfortable. What would I do without this chain? Where would I go? Where would my place be? I could go anywhere if I didn't have to be here. This is where I'm safe, with my concrete walls. I know where my boundaries are. People have feelings that they deserve what they have. Some in fear, and some in pride. There are many classes. But God has blessed mine. God has blessed my position. Whatever one I'm in is the bottom. It is the bottom that you can reasonably live. I'm okay. My parents are okay. We're good in our class. The people below us are lazy, and the people above us, well, we don't talk about them. Maybe a good church would. Maybe we'll talk about how they won't get to heaven, how they're sinners, perverts, degenerates, whatever beliefs made out of whatever materials we want to justify our needs. No one's special. We're all created by God. But some of us go to heaven and most of us go to hell. That's what we believe. Especially the people that take comfort in the movie God is for Real. Because God's prophet came back to earth and said everyone in the middle class, upper middle class is doing great and fine and they should just keep going. Because that's what it means when God sends a prophet. That you're doing everything great. Those wealthy middle class white Americans don't need to do anything. What war on terror? What exploited third world? What slavery in prisons? Our life is fine. We didn't do any of that stuff. We didn't have slaves. We didn't tell them not to be Christians. We are doing fine, going to our Bible schools and our private schools and having our yearly Easter pageants. Everything is good. But we ignore, or they ignore, that as humans we only survive by staying together, by helping one another, by cooperating. But if we have an excuse not to cooperate, then we can be selfish and we don't have to do anything. We feel safe when we know our neighbors look like us and earned their way like we did. It's okay if you earned it. If there's an art contest, we can judge it and we know what art has value and can determine the best, the winner. Mr. Rogers didn't take thoughts this far. He might have in his personal life. Maybe he thinks people do deserve shelter and should be helped out. And he definitely believed everyone was special. But the views I express are a little more than what he talked about. Similar to him, I went to seminary. I was a Christian. I thought my interpretation of the Bible was correct, and I wanted to help people. I wanted to help the poor, but I did it according to what conservatives allow. He was a product of his training, education, and upbringing, as much as I was, and as much as I am. Even though I'm admittedly past the point in my life where I'm constricted by these chains that I created, I'm still chained. Some of my beliefs are paper, and that's where challenge comes in. To let our beliefs collide. Let the chains be examined. Bring in hard facts and see what happens to our paper. There are limits to my knowledge and limits to what I can do, but I won't know until I find their limit. I won't know what they're made of. When I was a conservative Christian, I held on to all my beliefs at once. I believed that we, as Christians, were to exemplify Christ, that we were to make more Christians by demonstrating in our lives that we were better, that we knew better, that we were secure, that everything was filled up. And we did this by being loud and by being superior. We needed to exemplify Christ. The Bible is 100% literal and correct. We had to tell people that we had it figured out. We knew all the secrets. We were to help the poor, because the poor listened to us the most, because the poor had material needs that we could meet as long as they came to church. Conservatism told us the best way to help the poor is to let them learn how to help themselves. To conservatives, help is an addiction, a shortcut, cheating the system. The more you help someone, the lazier they'll become and the more help they'll need. Our compromise to this very individualistic, very Ayn Randian view was that the best way to help someone is a little bit, to get them in the church, so then they can learn that they need to help themselves. Encourage them to do most of their own work. That's the only way. Help them help themselves. Or the only way to help the poor is to not help the poor. And the poor people that didn't come to church, well, God wasn't ready to help them. God doesn't believe in cooperation. We only come together as a community in the church. We only find friends in the church. To other people that are also worthy and have put in the work and can tithe. If you're a good Christian, God will reward you. Oh, cooperation. Civilization is and always has been cooperative. We make the roads. We are workers that build houses and build communication lines. We improve technologies to make life better, to improve medicine, and to make it so that not everyone has to be a farmer in order to eat. And this frees us up to then make more technology and enjoy art and entertain one another, and gives us time to think about, consume, and conceive complex thoughts about what is the state and other non-material entities. And because of this, we have a surplus of everything. For now. In the early American colonies, there was only neighbors. The winters were long and cold. It was a new and strange world. We didn't know about seasons and what things would grow in the soil and the new animals that were available, but were also harder to hunt and impossible to domesticate. Food storages were short, and famously our first colonial town did not survive the winter. In the spring, when new ships came, they found only empty towns and buildings. There wasn't any economy. There wasn't a sharing economy. People shared. They had to share food and treat each other's illnesses because any loss of life meant a loss in labor, and that lessened the chance that the colony would survive. It wasn't until there was a surplus of manpower and food that we started charging for food and houses. Conditions weren't different. Conditions aren't different today, but it's easy to ignore the poor and the freezing and the starving, so that's what we do. Cooperation was necessary as it is today, but we had to work at it. We had to consciously share food with one another. We had to check for food shortages. Any dead the community would have to remember to bury in the spring. Those times were dark and hard. Imagine a trip to the grocery store at midnight in the middle of winter, only it never ends. You're always cold in your car. Wherever you go, you are that cold forever. There is no inside. There is no heating. There is no relief. Anything warmed comes at the price of wood that has to be chopped and gathered from the cold. If it can be chopped and gathered at all, if it's not frozen. Everywhere is fraught for the chance of injury and mistakes, so people had to be rested and careful because any injury meant a loss of weeks of labor for the community and for the collective. We ignore the needs because the conservative idea, the Christians, the nice people say that you can't help people for too long, otherwise they'll never be able to help themselves. They assume that the market or God will take care of everything that he wants to. People get and got what they deserve. If you're rich, you deserve it. If you're poor, you deserve it. And you're lazy. The market will take care of everyone and everything despite not having foreplanning or knowledge of what people need. That person on the street, the best way to help him is to not help him because he needs to prove to the market that he deserves clothes and warmth and food and a house. Despite our surplus of food and housing and clothes. If there is a hill on a public park and there are a group of teenagers charging children nickels to use the hill, would you let them continue to do that? It's everyone's hill. And if you stopped them, surely it would be unfair to the children who already paid nickels to sled. After all, they already paid the money. It's unfair not to charge more children money. So in society, we're letting teenagers threaten children in order to use the sledding hill. And if they don't pay the teenagers money, the teenagers hurt them. This is modern commerce. This is all of our modern commerce. Paying for food by itself is a violent act of something that you are entitled to. You are entitled to eat, to have a happy life, to feel secure, to have a house. Those are things as humanity that we should strive for everyone to have. Why do we have a system where people have to re-earn what society has worked hundreds of years to make? What society in early colonialism strived to give everyone. in order for everyone to survive. The foundation of our culture is building dwellings and houses. Commerce is violence. Because if you don't have food or a home, you will die. We can just take the homeless people and give them one of our many empty houses. We can reduce our amount of daily thrown away food and feed the poor. We can reduce our daily wasted food and feed the poor. Why do we strive in society if not to feed one another, if not to enrich one another, if not to make one another feel secure and special and unique? Because you are. But if you entitled everything, why would people work? Well, Richard Wolff has this illustration where he'll go and talk to doctors, and he'll ask the doctors this hypothetical, where what if they were paid more to be coal miners? If at their current rate of for how much money a year you make as a doctor, you'd make twice that as a coal miner, who would become a coal miner? And no one volunteers. He then says you're paid that much for a coal mining. He then, once no one volunteers to be a coal miner, he then lowers the pay for being a doctor. What if you make half as much? What if you make a quarter as much? And instead of giving in, the students start trying to figure out how little pay they can have in order to continue being a doctor, in order to become a doctor. They don't want the money. They want to be doctors. They want to help people. And so do you. You want to use your special gifts. You want to feel like a part of a community. You want to know that there are people that you like and that you think are special. Money is not our key incentive as a society. Most people work in order to keep their children in a home and fed and happy. It would be a much less brutal, violent society if those things were guaranteed and the mother allowed to work, or father allowed to work, but not required to work so much, or possibly at all. Because we do have a surplus of workers and labor anyway. What's the value of our economy if we have to threaten everyone's lives to keep it going? Why do we have to hold these needs above people's heads when they're all surpluses, when they're all easily provided? Everyone could sled down the hill. I want to end it on that phrase. I haven't directly contended with entitlements programs. This is the serious part of the backlash to Mr. Rogers. That everyone is special means that everyone deserves life and has these entitlement programs. They sneer like, oh, you're entitled to it. Oh, your entitlement program you get for nothing. But they didn't coin the term entitlements. They're called entitlements because you're entitled to them. They are yours. You pay into Social Security. You were born and given a Social Security card. Every effort of your labor that you make through your life pays into Social Security. And at the end of your working time, you get to live off Social Security because it's yours. You deserve it. You did the work. It is yours. You are entitled to it. That's what it is. And the point of the conservative message is to take away what you're entitled to through a snide trip, through this idea of market and what we do to deserve to live. It is to support and hide the violent acts that commerce does in order to keep you working and in order to make you think that you are better than other people that have less than you. Don't listen to the glass-chewing chuds wearing $500,000 suits who are paid tens of thousands of dollars a day to read a prompter. Don't let them talk down to you or think that you are better than another person or think that they are better than you to enforce this violent act that we call commerce. Don't let them take away what is entitled to you because they made you think that you deserve things more than other people. Don't let that person made to read off a prompter convince you that you shouldn't get what you paid for with your labor and with your life and with your ancestors. What your ancestors built so that you can have. We don't fund schools so that our children can't go to them. We don't fund schools so that our technology doesn't increase. We fund them to use them. And once we build them, they are ours. And if we don't have them publicly owned, if they're privatized, then they're no longer ours, and they're trying to make someone else richer through violence. Private ownership of the things that make society run is a violent theft of the people who made them and invented them and have strived to keep society going ever since we first started hunting mammoth together. I talk a little more about how conservatives twist facts and try to frame things in this way to lie to you in my conservative framing video on the Democratic debates. Making you pay for something that culture and society built and made and delivered and made available to you is violence. And that threat won't necessarily spring on you because you can afford to go to the Gap, have a smartphone, have health care. There is a bottom to our society. We have a hierarchy, and the people at the bottom die on the street. And that threat is not just for them, it is for you. It is making good on that threat of violence. If you do not put into society, we will kill you, despite how special you are, despite your talents, despite how much you've worked. If you run out of money, we will ignore you on the street while you die. And sometimes it's not even because you ran out of money. Sometimes it's because you were black on the street. So now you're a criminal, because you're a drug addict, because you're sad, because you're too depressed to go to work, because you were abused as a child. We do not make time and abilities for people to live their lives. We do not make it easily accessible despite our excess. We do not make it easily accessible despite our excess. The bottom of the middle class, the migrant, the criminal, the poor, the homeless are all sacrifices, threats made real, killed by our economy. And the same threat passes to you. Criminals and ex-cons are as much citizens, as much people, as much human as anyone else on the planet. Yet, their hire rate is lower. Their success rate is lower. And their exploitation is higher. In prison, they do work, commit labor for society for next to free. They are slaves without freedom, without choice, and without personhood. Without a name, given a number and given a task and not given a choice, despite their circumstances, despite their individuality, despite their name, despite how we built the society, how we have an economy, the only purpose of which should be feed us and give us housing. But the only purpose we gave it is to make money. And the best way to make money is to not pay people that work. Slavery is a real boost to our economy. And the threat of prison is something that also keeps us working. If you don't go to your job and keep your nose clean and supply everything you need, despite that not being available to everyone, we will kill you in prison and make you work for free. But we don't have to punish people for being poor, for being disabled, for being not white, for being not educated. The death pit underneath our society that you are constantly threatened with doesn't have to exist. If we socialize shelter, transportation, food, education, and healthcare, that means no one will have to work at McDonald's unless they really enjoy it. And that will mean that someone has to make working for McDonald's enjoyable and maybe healthy. Our economy has to threaten our lives in order to keep running. And a threat is no good without a follow-through. Our economy has victims. Piles of bodies. Exploited people that have to work or they're compost. Bodies forced to work so that someone makes profit. Someone of a very select few passed down old money billionaires. Prisons make the state money. Prisons sell the exploited labor to factories at a lower cost, so that it's easier for the factories and for the retail stores to make money. Workers in prisons don't have fair compensation. Workers everywhere don't have fair compensation. Their needs are not met. Their needs are not met. Every arrest by the police is profitable to the state. The state makes money off people being arrested. Every prisoner has the same emotional, economic, and food survival needs that you do. And they deserve it as much as you do. And to the state, you are as expendable as they are. It's better when people don't do things for money. People are doctors because they want to be doctors and help people. People work hard because they like working. They like accomplishment. They like seeing something made, especially when they're allowed to keep what they're making. You love the hell out of that shitty birdhouse you made because you made it. That's the same deal with IKEA furniture. No matter the quality of the desk, if you have to build it, you like it more. People make art because they like art, and they love sharing art and seeing other people enjoy it. I wrote this book, and I love it when people read it and talk to me about it, and it makes people think about the complex emotions that come from the characters and the situation I put them in, and the things that they do. Everyone is special like that. A society, an economy that is geared for providing for the needs of people, so that people get food, shelter, emotional needs, free time, and rest. That economy will not generate war and pollution and dead bodies like our current economy makes. Taking economic pressure away from people helps them connect better and more genuinely. People enjoy hanging out with people that they love. People like having friends and doing activities and creating. Somewhere along the lines, I may have said something that you disagree with, that you don't think that we should do as a society for free. Just let it be a thought in your head. Let it revolve around the moons of thoughts that are in your mind. Keep in mind that our history exists for our future, to serve our needs. We have roads so that we could use them. If people didn't like art, no one would make art. People didn't like reading or writing, they wouldn't do it. But people do these things and enjoy art. Even in prison, even as a child who does not have a fully developed brain. People do these things. People make art and read. Even in prison, even under the threat of death, people lose sleep in order to write a book, in order to make a D&D campaign that will make them zero money. People do things that are not monetized all the time because they love them and because they want to share them with other people. That's what our economy should be trying to facilitate. If you disagree, just hold on to these ideas, because on some level you do agree with a part of it. You do like reading, watching TV, having your mind engaged, being with friends, drinking alcohol, revelry, spectacle. You like being entertained and engaged with. It is time to embrace the truth that we exist for more than making money, and that our lives shouldn't be threatened to keep an economy going. That we are more than cogs in a machine, that we're more than employees. We are the inheritors of the earth, for us all to work in and improve and protect. We all deserve agency. You are special. You are the one I like. No one else on earth is quite like you. Thank you for watching my video that I made in my spare time and I wrote. Unfortunately, we are in a society that threatens my life if I don't have money. So if you have an excess of money and don't feel the threat of the death pit of our society, I encourage you to give me some money on Patreon. There, if you want, if you like fiction, I have fiction, and I post up everything that I write, and it's available for you before it's published in anything or sold to you. You can read it all raw from a tier on my Patreon. And you'll also be notified by any essays and other things that I make. Thank you very much for watching this. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart that I love you. And thank you so much for spending time with me. Did I forget to mention? Mr. Rogers wouldn't ding anyone. Mr. Rogers wouldn't scold anyone for having and liking long hair.